And Iain Duncan Smith joins me now. Welcome back to the Sunday Politics. Now, you've claimed that leaving the EU would be good for the have-nots. But the Governor of the Bank of England and a host of other authorities, they say it could lead to recession, employment, inflation, all of which would be bad for the poorest, wouldn't they?
Yes, if all their predictions were absolutely right. It's worth bearing in mind that every single one of these predictions, first of all, is done by groups of people who have got most of their predictions wrong. So the point I would make to you, however, there is one continuum in all of their predictions. The bank's prediction, the Treasury's prediction, and even the IMF's prediction all show that if Britain left the European Union, our economy would grow. Their argument is it might not grow as fast as it would otherwise grow. But of course, how for 15 years ahead you can predict a 0.6 variation in anything, as the Treasury report says, is beyond me. So I have a very simple
But the Bank of England's not talking about to 2030. Its forecast is short term.
I was going to come to that, yes. OK, so here's the point that I really believe about the bank, which is where I find this very, very bad. I think the bank, the governor, has strayed now into the expression of what is a simple personal prediction. I don't actually think that it is possible for you to say with any absolute accuracy that that will happen. And actually, in a sense, when you listen to what he said, he started to nuance a little bit about the idea he wasn't actually saying it would be. He thought it could be like that. And here's my point about the independence of the Bank of England. Section 10 of the 1998 Act makes it very clear that if he is to talk about monetary policy for which he has independence, not, by the way, for the rest of his activities, he has to be open, he has to be impartial, and all things must be available. Last year, in 2015, when he spoke about the threats to the British economy, he actually made the point, which Mervyn King has made, that the euro instability and the crash in the euro is A, has been very damaging to the British economy, and B, as it goes on, will be even more damaging. Notice that when he came out on Thursday, he said nothing about the overall problems if we remained in. If you're going to be impartial, if you're going to be fair, then you damn well better say something about what the alternative case is.
All right.
And the threats of remaining are very clear. Mervyn King said there is a crisis which is going on and he does not see an end to it, and he said that will be incredibly damaging to the British economy. So why don't we hear from him?
No, you've made that point. I want to ask you another question. Therefore, has Governor Carney, has he breached his obligations as Governor of the Bank of England?
I think that he has. I believe that he has.
Should he resign?
I think that that is a matter. I think he ought to, in fact, be asked by the Select Committee, the Treasury Select Committee, exactly why he hasn't brought out both sides of this issue. If you're going to be impartial, you better be impartial. Now, you know, he used to work for Goldman Sachs. We see Goldman Sachs running all the way through this. They are funding the Remain campaign. And I'm told by those who know him that he has actually always been very keen on the whole European project.
All right, so I mean,
he may or may not be, but my point is very
you bring out Goldman Sachs, you bring out the lack of impartiality. You think he's not keeping his remit to be independent. Should he resign?
I think he has to answer by this one simple charge. I would ask now to see exactly what the email traffic exchange between the Treasury and the bank was over this issue, over the telephone conversation, the minutes of those meetings, to see whether or not the Treasury itself has had any involvement in this process whatsoever. Because, you know, what worries me slightly about what's going on, we have, you know, oh, this is an accident, is it? The Bank of England comes out on Thursday, and then suddenly the ex-French foreign minister, now the head of the IMF, comes out on Friday with a similar prediction about global crash. These are the same people a few weeks ago that were telling us all that actually the UK is too small to leave and too insignificant. Now we're so significant that we're going to plunge the whole of the world into an economic crash. And is it, what, Thursday, then Friday? Are we saying that this was an accident? You know, the governor rings up Christine Lagarde and says, "You didn't tell me you were in town. Why didn't you give me a call?"
No, I think we could take it. Let me ask you this then. We know what major economic authority. Well, hold on. Before I move on, are you saying they're colluding?
Well, I wonder. You know, is it what? It seems surprising.
But do you have any evidence?
Well, I think anybody watching this would ask, you know, is it a surprise suddenly on Thursday, then followed by Friday? You have two reports coming out. Do you think they told each other or talked to each other about what they were doing? I wonder about that. I don't know. Well, the one continuing all of this is, of course, the Chancellor, you know, who's out immediately supporting the governor, and he then sits beside Christine Lagarde, and when she gets up, she openly thanks him and the Treasury for their assistance in making her report.
All right. Well, of course, the
Treasury,
the
IMF, players in
but
this
the IMF always works with the finance ministries of the country.
I know, precisely.
Investigating
so
under its Article 4 investigation. Well, we know which major economic authorities you don't like: the Treasury, the IMF, the Bank of England, the OECD. Which major economic authorities do you rate?
Well, there have been some good reports out, and I think there are a number of economists like Gerard Lyons, like Patrick Minford, lots of others that from the city who have also produced a report which got very little coverage, funnily enough, about the prospects
But
going
any
ahead.
major economic authority?
Yes, but all of these economic authorities, when they have actually come out with their report, have all said the UK would continue to grow if we left the European Union.
But not as quickly.
Not as quickly. So my point here is, surely if you're going to be balanced, you need to constantly reference that point and then say, if he wants to say there is a possibility that this could lead to a problem, he needs also to point out that if we remain and the euro continues in its crisis, there's a possibility that we will be heavily damaged by that.
You've made that point 3 times. Let me ask you this. Can you name a major economic authority on your side of the argument?
I wouldn't expect a major economic authority to be on our side in this argument.
So you have none?
No, I wouldn't expect one to be on. It would be completely unusual for all of these institutions not to want to back the status quo.
All right,
that is normal what happens with this. Everyone does. Look, after all these institutions said that there was no problem in 2007, and then a year later we hit the buffers and the economies went down. Not one of them predicted the crash. Okay, so who suffered from that?
Including the Conservative Party.
Who suffered? Yeah, but none of these great economic authorities, by the way, that are lecturing us like mad, have ever apologised for their failure. Let's the Queen to ask them to apologise.
No, she just asked why they didn't see it coming. There wasn't an apology. Let's just look at one particular economic problem. I want to show you this chart. This shows us our balance of payments, our deficit. It's the difference between our exports and imports. We import a lot more than we export in goods and services. It's continually got worse under your government, but that's not my point. This deficit, which is multi-billion, is financed by foreigners who buy our sterling assets to make up the gap. If Brexit, as all these economic authorities think, creates uncertainty and a falling pound, why would the foreigners continue to pay for our deficit?
Well, if the economy didn't perform, why would they? But I have the alternative view on this, which is if you look at all of those who predicted where we would be now, they all said that the threat of Brexit would actually bring the pound crashing. The pound is now rising back up. It's pretty close to where it was when we started this campaign.
Well, it's 10% down in last November, but that's not what I've asked you.
But it's gone back up. So my point is,
we have this deficit. It's financed by foreigners. If they lose confidence in this country or confidence in sterling, how do we pay for this massive balance of payments deficit?
And the reality is we have to make sure that we run the economy in a way that they have confidence in it. We have to get some of those regulations down. We have to make British industry much more competitive. We have to have a much better plan to get industry working again and to get manufacturing going.
That would be in the long term. This could be a short-term problem that could hit us in the summer, in July and August. And if it results leaving in an uncontrolled and a plummet in sterling, and the foreigners, because of the uncertainty and because sterling is going down, saying, we're not going to continue to finance it, the bank would have to raise interest rates, wouldn't it?
If that was the circumstance, yes, but I don't believe that is going to be the circumstance. I have a very simple view about this, that it is what you plan to do. I mean, why are they investing in what we're doing at the moment? Why do they buy our bonds? And they buy them because they believe, by and large, the government has a long-term plan and is acting on that to get the deficit down and thus to reduce borrowing. And so they believe that, therefore, the UK is a good investment because it is a global trading nation and is actually running a trade surplus with the rest of the world. So there are good reasons why they should continue.
Actually, we're running a huge deficit with the overall world.
Yeah, but we're running a trade surplus with the rest of the world. The deficit is hugely with the European Union.
If the need to finance this deficit, and it's not the budget deficit, it's the balance of payments deficit, it's not to do with government guilt. It's how the foreigners buy our assets in order to help us run this deficit. If interest rates did rise, and you've admitted they could, it follows that mortgage rates would rise and could rise substantially.
Yes, but the alternative could be exactly the same. In other words, that they believe that what we're doing turns out to be right for the UK economy and they're prepared to back it. And that means that actually you wouldn't have rising mortgage rates and you wouldn't have rising interest rates. All of this is utter speculation because we don't know.
Except that Boris Johnson has admitted that after Brexit there would be what he called a Nike tick, that in the immediate aftermath the economy would take a hit, but then of course he thinks it could recover strongly. Do you accept that it could take a hit?
Well, it could possibly, but it may also possibly not. My point here is that this is speculation about something that nobody actually knows. There's been so much speculation about forecasts in these economies. Most of them are wrong because people are unable to tell us exactly what people think of our prospects afterwards. My sense about this, and I believe it to be right, that if we vote to leave, we're already able to show that we're able to get our money back in due course, and worse, better than that, we're able to start planning our own economy so that we're able to get the kind of deals that we need. That shows that you have a plan that works.
But you could have a short-term crisis in the interim, couldn't you?
But in the medium term, which is what you're after, actually
people
overall
paying mortgages
have
don't want them. They're worried whether their mortgage will have risen by August or September of this year.
If that was to happen, but the word is if. You know, you are using the words on speculation, and this is pure speculation. And the point that I'm making is that the reality is it may go in exactly the opposite direction. Okay. None of the Chancellor, nobody else is able to say that.
Let me move on. Let me ask you this. The EU guarantees a number of social protections for workers. Covers things like equal pay, working time, paid annual leave, maternity pay. Can you pledge to fight to maintain all of these protections if we leave?
Well, all of these were accepted by my existing government, the Conservative government, and I believe strongly that there need to be protections for workers. All of these things, of course, in a democracy are debatable and debated. But the point is that the British government, successive British governments, have actually themselves instituted protections for workers. So it's right to have protections for workers.
So would you fight to keep the protections they currently have under the EU guarantees?
As they stand right now, yes, that is the example.
Why should people trust you? Because you opposed the EU social chapter in 1992. You opposed the work time directive in 1996. You voted against the minimum wage in 1997. Why would the have-nots look to you for this kind of social protection?
Because rather than forecasting ahead, just look back what's happened to them. And the point that I'm making to them is the uncontrolled migration across European Union boundaries has damaged them. A fact. I'm not speculating, I'm not forecasting forward. I'm simply saying what has happened. And therefore my argument has been, and you've known that for a long time over the last 6, 7 years, well actually there are 9 years, I've argued that actually this process has been most damaging to the people who are at the low-skilled end of life.
I understand, that's the migration issue. That may well be true.
It's an economic issue.
But I'm asking you,
it's an economic
why
issue.
should people trust you on these EU social protections that they would remain if we came out, since you voted against them all when they were being proposed?
The Working Time Directive of itself gave little or no flexibility to businesses and to employers at the time. It's been in place and we have had to work with it. But my reality here is, and the way that I believe all of this is done, is you protect the workforce, but you make sure that the competition that they face in terms of their jobs is actually fair competition, not unfair competition. Right. And what has happened hugely, as you saw on Thursday with the national insurance numbers, is a very high proportion of people coming in under 52 weeks here who have no commitment to the UK, often staying in bedsits, compete with people on the low salaried end of life. They have driven those wages down. The Bank of England report was very clear about that. And that's all I'm saying.
Is the Working Time Directive, which guarantees the hours people work in a week and proper breaks, is that safe after Brexit or not?
UK law would enshrine what we think is best for protection of workforce, and that's exactly right. You're a democratic government. The democratic government will decide on what it thinks is right. That is possible for Labour or Conservative argument and debate. I believe that it's right to have it. The question is how flexible you are about the way it's operated.
People watching this will not sound reassured by this.
Well, I've said we will stick to the agreements that we have.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.